Welcome to Syntax. Today, CJ and I sat down with Paul Copplestone, the co-founder of Supabase. We dive deep into the tech that powers Supabase. We talk all about Paul's outlook on open source and the origins of Supabase, including why it's Supa and not Super. So without further ado, here's Paul. So, welcome to Syntax, Paul. If you want to give us a quick introduction about maybe who you are and what you do at Supabase, and then we can get into some of the things a little bit deeper about Supabase as a product.
Yeah, thanks for thanks for inviting me. My name's Paul Copplestone. I'm the CEO and one of the co-founders of Supabase. We're basically a open source Firebase alternative is how we position ourselves early on, but you can think of us really as a Postgres hosting company.
Nice. Yeah. And, as a Postgres hosting company or even an alternative there, I've always been impressed with UI of Supabase, how it makes things feel nice and easy for the user to get up and running. It's not like you're managing a database, right? So with that said, here's a quick question for my 5-year-old. Why Supa and not Super?
Yeah, because it's very hard to purchase the domain name Super. That was literally
nice.
it at the start. Domain-driven naming. That's pretty much how I do all my side projects.
Yeah, nice.
Which turns out to be both, by the way, a blessing and a curse. The blessing is that it's very easy to find mentions of Supabase across the internet, and people have started putting super on everything. The curse is that it doesn't feel that enterprisey. It's kind of like a bit of a meme, which is also, by the way, where the name came from. Like, and to myself like to meme a lot, and so Supabase obviously is a Nicki Minaj song, and we thought it was funny that it was called Supabase, and that somehow stuck. Yeah, but here we are. It's working.
Yeah, I always think of there's an MF Doom song where he says he's Supa in it, and I always think about that when I hear Supabase. So do you want to maybe give some background into, how did Supabase start? Even from like technical foundations to, why?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so timeline first is we started in January 2020, so really just 4.5 years old now. We went to YC in that summer batch as well, and have just kind of been building fully remotely. So started during COVID and building the company remotely. The sort of genesis was that in my previous startup, I was building using Postgres, but one part of the tool was a chat application, and I was using Firebase. I actually really love Firebase. I think the developer experience is amazing, but we hit some technical issues in terms of like the performance around sending the messages. And so I looked at migrating it to Postgres. And I did it quite naively at the start. Postgres has this listen notify system where you can push messages out of it. And I thought that was good until I ran into another technical limitation there on the Postgres side. And so I had to build a real-time engine kind of on top of Postgres. And I did that with Phoenix Elixir, which kind of was the right tool for the job. You can connect lots of clients to it. It's good for WebSockets. And we did it by kind of listening to the database replication stream, and then you convert those messages into, literally JSON payloads, and you can blast them out to the WebSockets. So it was a cool technical solution, and I'm a big Hacker News reader, and I put it on Show Hacker News, and it got a lot of interest at that point. And so I knew I was going to do a dev tool startup after my last startup. And so that seemed like the right time. And I tapped my co-founder on the shoulder and said, this is what I want to do. I want to go to YC. Should we do it? And somehow convinced him to leave his startup to help me build Supabase.
Wow. So how long after first lines are written did you end up joining YC?
Oh, yeah. So probably, I think the Hacker News launch that I did that one was on, for just that real-time engine, was maybe in like September 2019. We started the company January 2020, and then we sort of got accepted maybe, I think it was March or April of 2020. Yeah. And we didn't have
Wow, that's
much,
pretty fast.
quite honestly. Yeah,
Wow.
but we're both three-time founders. We were shipping fast. We tried to check off all the things that YC like to like.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So yeah, I like the fact that Supabase is open source and can be self-hosted. Was that a decision you made early on that you were going to make this thing and keep it open source?
Yeah, honestly, it wasn't even really a conversation at the start. I think just Ant and I kind of philosophically love open source. I wouldn't want to work on a dev tools if it was closed source. That's kind of the truth. So yeah, that's about all the thinking that went into it. And then we try to support like our philosophy on open source, I think is a little bit unique in that, a lot of the tools that make up the Supabase stack are all existing open source tools. And that was really important to us as well. It feels like open source is a lot of like, I'm going to do some new way of doing this and it's got to be my own. But we actually like the model where you can try to support the tools that exist. They might not be perfect, but we can help to try and make them perfect is the idea. So that's kind of our philosophy around open source, one of the key philosophies.
Yeah, it's one of the things that first drew me to Supabase. I've built a few projects with it. And the simple fact that it's built on top of Postgres, like I know a lot of times when you're choosing a new tech for a project, you worry about like vendor lock-in or like, am I going to have to keep using this if I don't like it or something like that? But to me, it was super cool to see that it's built on top of Postgres. I can use everything I know about Postgres. And if I really ever wanted to stop using Supabase, I could just literally take my database with me, which was nice.
Yep. Which has happened in the past. We have like in our docs, one of the core principles is portability. You should be able to take anything you build, just basically PG dump and take it to your favorite Postgres provider. And there might be some things depending on how far you lean into like some of the tooling that we've got. But in theory, like you can extract that. So we try to make everything very composable. So even though it's like a full back end, you can just use the database and stack other tools. Clerk's very common. You can use Supabase Auth or you can use Clerk with Supabase. That's kind of how we want it to be.
Do you have any stats on like how many people self-host? Do you keep track of that kind of thing?
No, we have no telemetry. Another thing that we think is like if you want to self-host, that's great. Anecdotally, I see a lot of people do it, so we're happy. And actually, some of the larger customers do it as well, so that's nice. But because I'm a developer and I don't like tracking, then I can't give you any stats.
Same.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
I think it fits very well into, I don't want to talk too much about Sentry because this isn't an ad for Sentry, but it fits very well in with what we're doing here at Sentry as well. Open source tool. It is, you can just spin it up. You can take it with you. You don't have to worry about handing out cash to use this tool, but it's your data. It's your information if you want it that way, not tracking people and such. It also shows that you can build a legitimate business on open source software, which it feels like that is a thing people feel like you can't do these days for some reason.
Yeah. I've been a long time fan of Sentry, by the way, and like the developer focus as well is one of the things that we get inspiration from Sentry. The way they build the product, the designs of it, and the simplicity. I think it's influenced our thinking a lot.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned the simplicity piece because that's what drew me to Supabase. I really got my start in full stack JavaScript and Meteor world where you had real time, you had your database, you had your auth, it was all very connected, right? Simplicity was a major source in there, and Supabase was the first product that I saw that really had that same feeling. Auth is baked in. You want the magic link, you got the magic link. You don't have to worry. You can expand upon that later if you want it. But just getting up and running 0 to 60 is very fast. So I guess like what was your inspirations for the simplicity of that? Was it just I want a tool that makes getting up and running very fast, or what was the inspiration there?
Well, with Firebase, I think is really one of those tools that's incredible for that. And I think a lot of people are like, Supabase is great, Firebase is not great, which is not true. Firebase is a phenomenal tool for getting started. It's just really incredible. And I think if they were, open source, I've actually chatted to the founder. If they were open source, like they would have probably the same vibe that we've got today. It's just that wasn't their path in 2012. The world was different then, right? So I think we literally kind of benchmarked how fast you could launch a database on Firebase and insert a document. And then we went to RDS and we benchmarked like how long it would took. And it was like 1 minute on Firebase and it was like 8 minutes on RDS because you got to set up your own separate application and everything. So that was like just our first test. Can we insert a document, like a row into Postgres as fast as Firebase?
Wow. Yeah, Firebase is one of those, I almost called it Firebase. No, it's like stuck in me. Firebase is one of those tools I kind of always avoided just because of its, you never know which products Googles are going to kill or whatever. And I didn't want to build, my information on something like that. But Supabase to me never had that same feeling, obviously, because of the nature of it. So, okay, so you want to make a better open source Firebase, and I think it definitely fits that vibe. But going forward, like, how do you take it further than Firebase now that you are, you have a different mission now, probably?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you have to solve, think of a database problem, right? You're going to launch a database company. What you want to do is like build the world's best database platform. So you go to a big company and you say, hey, you should host your databases with us. And all of them say, no, like, who are you? We can't trust you with your data. So there's only one way to build a great database company. It's to become the database that developers love on day one. They kind of choose their stack before they even think about their side project that they're going to build. And then a lot of them start scaling up, and because it's databases, they don't churn. You just make sure that your product is amazing for them and you could support them all the way through to IPO. And over the next 10 years, we build our credibility around Postgres. We build a lot of tooling for Postgres. We build a lot of scalability into Postgres. And we're having to do this contributing up, employing open source maintainers, making sure that the tool will go beyond anything that they'll even see on, say, AWS or on one of the big three clouds. We want to make sure that we can really fit that vision so that when we go to enterprises, we've got 10 years of credibility and scalability and logos to prove it.
So looking at the docs, I see that there are quite a few client libraries, not just JavaScript. So I see things for like Flutter, and then in the recent GA announcement, you announced the Swift client. But then there are community packages for like Python and C# and Kotlin. So how do you decide which client libraries are going to be official versus like keeping them more like community maintained?
Yeah, not easily.
Yeah, I imagine.
So we developed first our JavaScript libraries and TypeScript libraries because that was the thing. The thing that was really missing when we started was there was no backend for the Jamstack, Vercel and Netlify. And so we really focused in on that use case first. So JavaScript was the natural thing. How do you, as well, like this type of front-end developer, I would say, is not so familiar with the nuts and bolts of Postgres. And so it's a really easy win. We can just abstract that away and make it incredibly easy for you. Versus, say, maybe like a PHP developer, popular now, probably know a bit more of the nuts and bolts, setting up ORMs and things, and they're going to use their Laravel and it might handle it for you. So that was the use case that we focused on. Then over time, just of course, a lot of people started piling in and requesting all sorts. Mobile became very popular because of Firebase was very popular and people wanted to migrate to Supabase. And so they wanted mobile. We ended up doing Flutter first because it was kind of like a new system, and that actually came from the community. This is like kind of our hiring strategy. We had this person contributing. They did the open source Flutter libs. It started getting popularity, and so we just hired him to work on that full time.
Nice.
And he's a dev role.
That's a good lesson.
Yep. You might see him.
Who
Tyler.
is it?
Tyler.
Okay.
He's a Japanese dev role, actually. So he was based in Japan.
Nice.
Funnily enough, working at HubSpot as just an engineer at HubSpot. Nothing to do with DevRel, but it turns out he's also just very good at this type of stuff. So it's cool. We've done a lot of that, by the way, like people who contribute to our community and they're kind of too good to ignore, that we're just going to hire them. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. So I think that's kind of how it happens. Like we just have people contributing, and then eventually as something becomes popular enough that the community are kind of shouting that, hey, can you make this official? Then we pull the trigger.
That's probably a good strategy, yeah.
I guess I should also mention for anyone else that's listening that isn't familiar, you don't necessarily need a client library, though. I think that's one thing about Supabase is you could connect directly to the database and just use your preferred ORM, or you could just use your favorite REST API client and talk to the REST API. So it's important to note you don't need these client libraries, but it is cool that you have that support as well.
Yeah, thanks for shouting that out, because it's actually one thing that we did too well at the start was positioning like some of the Supabase tools, the additional tools that at the start, now we're having to change the narrative that you don't actually have to use all those tools. You can just use the database. And I'm a big fan of Drizzle, for example, becoming very popular with Supabase. But yeah, Prisma is popular, Keasley, all of these, like whatever you want, you can plug your Ruby and anything you want on top of the Postgres database, and we're happy. Like that's where we want to be.
Yeah, and you could still take advantage of the Supabase platform itself. Without having to worry about the client-side libraries.
We've got a ton of cool database stuff like index advisors, security advisors, and scaling out read replicas, like just making sure that it is easy on the database side. So the additional stuff is there if you need to reach for it. Great for prototyping, and the Postgres maxis like myself love the additional tools. But if they're not for you, then that's kind of fine.
So you guys also have edge functions, right? Is the idea with edge functions there to kind of remove the need for any kind of backend server component to your, like Supabase completely would become the backend of your application? You can just use an edge function when you need server-side functionality?
Actually, the reason, so we started doing these things launch weeks. I think they're pretty popular now. And every single launch week would say, guess what we're shipping? And people would be like, functions. We'd be like, no, we're not. No. And then after like 4 launch weeks, people were like, when the F are you shipping functions? So we had to scout around to find like an open source runtime for running functions. And Dino, of course, sort of made the cut. But actually the way I like to position our functions is, because they serve a very important purpose with databases, is not to, like, for example, if you're using Next.js, I actually recommend you just bake all of that sort of routing logic in there. But where it's useful on the database side, I like to refer to them more as like background workers. So as an example, we're becoming very popular for AI applications because of pgvector. You can store your embeddings in Postgres, do RAG, all these sort of things. But creating the embeddings itself, you wouldn't really want to do it inside the database because it's a lot of compute and you choose your compute size. So what you want to do is maybe someone inserts some content and then you need to shove out this workload to somewhere else, like a background worker. And now we're starting to bake a lot of this embeddings, AI tooling into the edge functions itself. So you can now like insert 1 million rows of content and it'll trigger out 1 million of these workers, edge functions. They'll create the embeddings and stuff them back into the database. We call them database webhooks. That's the way to offload the compute.
Gotcha. I was going to just bring up now that you mentioned pgvector and that technical bit. Is that nice because you're built on Postgres that you can just utilize something like pgvector? And likewise, like, was that a tough technical challenge to implement it to an existing product?
Yeah, actually, no. There's another funny open source story that I just want to touch on here. So the way that pgvector came about was because this guy came in, he emailed me directly, and he's like, I'm building this. This is probably February 2023 or something like that. And he's like, I'm building this tool and I need to store embeddings, and there's this extension called pgvector and no one's using it, like none of the Postgres hosts. Can you please merge it. I've created a PR here, and I looked at the PR as just very well structured and everything. And I jumped on a call with him, and I said, what are you doing? And he talked me through it. And I said, okay, I'll merge it as long as you create like a chat with your docs inside our docs, which had actually not been done before. And so we called it Clippy. You can like search for Supabase Clippy as a joke, because we were really worried that it would be so shit that it would give the wrong answers and everything like that. And Clippy was, of course, terrible like that. So anyway, the guy did it on a contract, and like it was so awesome that, of course, we hired him. And that's the genesis of pgvector. So we were the first Postgres hosting company to offer pgvector, and we've been working on it. Now it's we're not the main creators. It's a guy called Andrew Kane, but we support him along with a few other companies that we're really grateful for as well, because the performance of pgvector in the past year has rapidly increased, which is pretty cool to see. And now the thing that you asked, like, is also a really interesting insight. Like, how hard was it to offer this new product? And this is like where I think our product strategy is a little bit unique. You can think of Postgres as like a really common substrate, and we think of almost everything like a Postgres problem. And we have a couple of other primitives that make Postgres really easy to use. Auth, the background workers, edge functions, storage for file storage, and like a few extensions that can trigger things. But if you, like, these are what I call like this sort of first order primitives that you need to build almost anything. But then we can mix and match all of these to create these second order primitives. And our first foray into like this product was actually the vectors. Like, we've got a whole section of our docs called Supabase Vector, but actually it wasn't really a new product. It literally was, hey, turn on this extension and here's a bunch of docs on how to use it. And it turns out that Postgres is so extensible that we could do this with several things, and probably will eventually, like search. You can use Postgres for searching. Queues, you can use it for workflows. So they're kind of like more solutions. Here's how to use our primitives to achieve a certain solution. And so, that's what I really liked the most about Postgres. Its extensibility gives us that option. We can just think of everything as a Postgres problem.
Definitely.
Nice.
On that note about documentation, though, like Supabase has some of the best documentation, like even before you added the AI stuff. So I'm just curious, did you have a strategy with that to like make sure you had good docs? And then also, I mean, it was cool to see like Supabase did the Clippy thing, and now almost every docs you go to have like AI.
Yeah.
So you can free form search, and the docs will like give you an answer for it. So like who worked on that? What's your secret? It's super cool.
Yeah, very much shared effort over the years. I remember docs were extremely important at the start. I remember I spent a week, and my goal at the start was like, you should be able to consume from start to finish everything in a couple of hours so that you kind of understand what you need to. So the conciseness was really important, and we were using DocuSource. Eventually we kind of outgrew it. We wanted to make it like more of a product, like docs as a product. The guy, Greg, who merged pgvector, was really responsible for a lot of that sort of early, the AI type productizing. And then we hired someone, Karis, who has just focused really on this, not only the development of the docs, but the information architecture of like making it really concise. And also like our goal as like docs as a product is somehow to bleed docs into the dashboard and the dashboard into the docs. So you'll start seeing like, the keys appearing and everything. Yeah, that's kind of the goal.
That's super cool to see though, because in the dashboard, like you're saying, like there's documentation, but it has my endpoints, my keys in it as well. So that's super cool to see.
Yeah. We have also like, because you touched on the RESTful interface that you get free of charge. It auto scaffolds out of your database. So it's kind of cool. Like it just has an open API spec, and we can literally generate like an entire like documentation page for you. Like here's the endpoint that you can click, and here's the Supabase JS query that you can run, and like we can embed that everywhere. And that concept actually came from Airtable. I really like Airtable as a tool. And I think a lot of their DX, like imagine Airtable, but it was Postgres, then you would have kind of this killer product, right? Because they had this have this auto-generated API as well, but their docs would also auto-generate as you change the schema. So yeah, that initial version of like auto-generating docs came from my use of Airtable.
Nice.
Yeah, and I suppose that helps keep everything up to date. I would imagine once your product continues to grow and grow and grow, it's pretty easy for docs to get out of sync. Next thing you know, users are having issues. Yeah. Man, it's a big challenge with such a large project. So yeah, kudos for executing on it so well. I want to talk about the product again in terms of like the underlying tech behind it. So when you first started it versus today, like let's talk about first the UI tech. So what's the UI built on, and then how has that changed over time? Is it same initial code base, or is it evolved into different platforms, or what's the story there?
So yeah, I think what we had at the start was a Next.js for our dashboard and Docusaurus for our landing page and docs. Then we moved everything to Next.js, and we started using a mono repo so we could do shared components, moved our docs in. And that was the goal. Like the goal was to get this really consistent feel. So like you can almost feel like the whole dashboard becomes one key product is kind of the goal, and make sure we've got consistency. So that's where like Next.js and I think Turbo Repo we're early adopter there, just to make sure that we could get this very consistent feel and UI kit. And we've got Johnny, you might see him on our Twitter. He shares sometimes some of the design systems and things, and he's phenomenal at coming up with some great components and things. So we've also got this very kaizen approach to everything. So like sometimes you'll see that things are a bit inconsistent in our dashboard, is because like he's trying out some new component that we're going like, or a pattern that we're going to spread out throughout everything, and it might just get tested in one area. Or he's fixing my poor design decision from 2020 probably is the other thing that he's doing. So we've leaned really heavily into Next.js, which has been great. Yeah, of course.
You mentioned starting naively, so that fits in well with that. I think that's the best way to start, though, right? You just get going and worry about it later. You mentioned Kaizen as well. Do you want to just give a quick couple second what that is and what it applies here?
Yeah, it comes from the Toyota production system. Kaizen means continuous improvement from the CEO to the assembly line worker is kind of the term. So it doesn't matter what you're doing, everything is a process that can be improved. And importantly, incrementally improved is one of the things that we put a lot of emphasis on. Like if people come out with big bang projects, we just say no, it's got to be done like in a very small way, chunk it down to a couple of weeks at most, and do increments everywhere. So even like our branding, and people like to rebrand their website or something like that. We haven't done that. We've just like evolved the branding of the website.
Yeah. It's kind of like iOS does that too, right? Like little components change here or there. Next thing you know, it's very different over time. Does that come from you, the Kaizen philosophy, or is that something that you brought to the table?
Yeah, I think that one's kind of one of my like core life values. Actually, I think that everything should be approached in this small improvement type way.
I love it.
Nice. So talking about internals, we talked about the UI tech. It's built with Next.js. Can you talk a bit about like the open source Supabase stack? So you mentioned the initial thing was kind of like a plugin for Postgres. What else is involved in that stack?
Yeah, the total stack is a few servers. Each one of them is open source. So Postgres, we don't run a fork or anything like that. We have a Postgres bundle. So our bundle has a bunch of extensions. That's all we do. So we bake the extensions in. But that same one that you see in our open source is the one that you can self-host and everything. Yeah. So that's the key component. And then like the other components are, for example, as one that you mentioned, Postgres, which is an auto-generating API on top of Postgres. And what you're going to find as I go through the tools is every single one is written in a different language, unfortunately for us. But usually they're the right tool for the job for a particular reason. So Postgres, actually I had used this stack in my previous startup, which is why I was so confident on it, and it became the early stack. But I had also written a blog post about it and had reached out to the maintainer to make sure everything was okay to say in the blog post. So I kind of knew him. And then when we were starting Supabase, I reached out to him to say, is it all right if we use it in Supabase and promote it, and anything that we can help with? And he said, we're looking for some sponsorship and I need $200 a month or something like this to keep maintaining it. And I said, what are you doing? And he literally was not working on anything. And I was like, well, there's no way you can maintain this for $200. So we just employed him immediately to work on that full time. Yeah. So
this is the best reoccurring story here is that you needed something, so you employed them. That's great.
Yeah. Well, and it's just such a common good for the world. So many people use Postgres, and it's so hard as a open source maintainer to make money from sponsorships. I mean, $250 a month. The poor guy, he lives in Peru, but still it's for the value that the world gets, it just seemed completely unfair. So anyway, he has maintained that for us, but for everyone else for the past few years. But that's been really helpful for the Supabase community too, because we've had to patch a lot of things that are important for our customers as well. But we try to make sure that nothing's Supabase specific. He makes choices only for the community. Auth actually came from Netlify. They had an Auth tool, which I guess we didn't have Auth when we launched, which was kind of funny because your database wasn't safe. But everyone was asking for it. And our promise to the YC community, because we got launched on Hacker News, was that we'll build Auth, but we'll do it in a very Postgres native way. And they're like, well, good luck. And we spent all of our YC batch trying to figure out how to do this. And we ended up, finding GoTrue by Netlify, integrating that with Postgres row-level security, which was quite a bit of work, but we ended up getting there. And in the end, that one we actually had to fork because, it diverged so much that we couldn't upstream some of the stuff. Storage, we have a storage engine for large files. That one as well, we had to create ourselves. It just sits on top of S3. So it's a very simple ingestion engine, can stream, can do transformations, things like that. But we do integrate with image proxy and support and upstream a lot of tooling there to integrate with Postgres. So doing things like distributed locking. So that's been a lot of fun working with the Evil Martians team on that side.
Yeah. Oh, they're great, aren't they?
Yeah.
I'm a huge fan of their blog in general. And for the S3 thing, for self-hosters, you just give the config a S3 bucket or a location, and Supabase does the rest. Is that the scoop?
So on that one, so our self-hosting, if you want the entire stack, is just a Docker Compose. So you just put Docker Compose up. And inside the Docker Compose, you put your S3 access key and secret, and so that will route it to your bucket. You can actually just, each one of the components, because of the way we've designed it, can also be self-hosted individually. So you could take the storage engine, for example, chuck it on Fly and then use it with Tigris or something like that, or wherever you want. I don't see a lot of that, funnily enough. I thought there would be a lot more like, I want this individual tool. Our Auth server, for example, is in Go, and it's very simple. I thought a lot of people would use it, but they don't really. They just want to use the entire stack together rather than one individual tool.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense, though. Yeah.
And personally, I've self-hosted it, and I think it's because ease of use. It's literally a Docker Compose up, so I didn't have to worry about swapping out the pieces. And then for the S3 storage, I just self-hosted MinIO, so all of that kind of just worked together.
Nice.
I think overall, it's really cool to hear that even though Supabase is built on top of all this open source stuff, it's you're basically giving back to the community. You're making sure that all of those open source libraries stay maintained, and Supabase isn't going to fail if one of these libraries fail because you're heavily invested in them as well. So that's really cool to hear.
Yeah, overall, I think that seems to be like a one of the very positive messages. One trap that you can get into hosting a podcast like this is people come on to pitch their product, and it's just like, here's my product, and here's why my product is so great, and why you should be locked into my product forever. But like, that it feels so much I don't know, it feels great to be able to talk about a project like this that doesn't lock you in, that enhances your workflow. You can host yourself if you want it. And I'm the opposite from CJ. Have you always hosted your own Supabase whenever you gave it a try? Okay.
No, when I first tried it, the self-host option wasn't available just yet.
Okay.
More recently, when I was trying out like Coolify and some of the self-host server stuff, that's finally when I spun up my own instance.
Yeah, I'm the type of person that I will look at the fact that you can host it yourself and just say, I'll sign up for the service anyways. And and for the most part, I've had just nothing but ease when getting into it. And so when you're designing this as a product on top of an open source project, how much of a consideration is that to make, like, I know you don't want to make the self-hosted version any worse, but how do you like make this into a viable business so people aren't just taking your code and running with it?
Yeah, it's actually one of the hardest things of open source. What I've realized is no matter how open source you are, you can never be open source enough for some people. So yeah. I have this like
yes
blog post in my brain, which I've been meaning to post, and like there's several spectrums upon which they'll judge you. So the first is like your license. How open source is your license? And so we actually check all those boxes because we have only MIT, Postgres, and Apache license. The second is how self-hostable you are. It's actually unrelated to open source by the technical definition, but people will judge you by that. Then the third is actually, are you a commercial entity? And if you make money, people will just not think you're open source enough. That's what I've come to realize. And so it's a tricky, that third one I think is unfair, and I just categorically remove them from my brain now if I'm talking to those people. I know that we can't satisfy them, which I think they do such a disservice to the open source community, because of course then open source maintainers feel bad asking for money, and of course then they stop maintaining things, which I wish that all the money in the world poured back into open source. That would be the ideal situation in society.
Yeah. We do a big open source donation here where Chad from Sentry wrote an app that scans our repo, so even the syntax repo, and then donates an allocated amount to all the projects on a consistent basis. And it's like, that was so simple for him to set up. It's a small allotment. We're getting so much benefit out of these projects. Like, it would be trivial for many companies to set this up, yet they're more satisfied with, just taking the code and running, really.
Yeah. I think on the self-hosting side, I get this question a lot, like, do you hobble it so that people have to use your cloud-hosted service? The answer is no, not at all. Like, we don't intentionally try to do anything, but we have a lot of work to do, even on our platform, right? And these people are kind of paying for it. They're the ones who will jump up and down, rightfully so. Like, if things are not working, they're like, I'm paying you $25 a month. Can you fix this thing? Versus the ones who are saying, I'm paying you nothing. Can you fix this thing? You, of course, have to focus on the person who's giving you money. That's just out of fairness to them. So we try, it's very hard to balance these two, because I hope, demonstrate to the world that we are open source and focused on open source. But it doesn't mean that we can spend all of our time focusing on customers who want to self-host. It's just not the way that we can operate a good business. Maybe as we grow and we make more revenue, we'll be able to allocate a lot more of that revenue towards that.
Yeah.
But we're not at that stage yet. Yeah.
But, you mentioned that you can never be open source enough. And that is true. You could be as open source as possible, and there's still going to be someone on the internet complaining, no matter what. I think, like you mentioned, optimizing for the paid customers is great. Giving the open source options, self-hosting options, those are all great. So it feels very like, I don't know, it feels very open and transparent. So it would be surprising that anybody, and sure enough, I can imagine someone's going to leave a comment on this like, oh, this is a great ad for Supabase. And it's like, okay. Somebody did that with our Pocket Base episode. We talked about Pocket Base for like 20 minutes. Somebody was like, this is an ad. And it's like, it's not an ad. What are you talking about?
Yeah. I mean, Pocket Base is amazing open source tool. Like, the good thing is like, like they don't have a hosted option. So like they can check of those boxes, like they truly are an open source product. So like, if they bring out a host option, then they will fall into that last category. But yeah, I think it's like, it's kind of fair. Like it keeps you focused on your community. At the end of the day, like we also want to serve them, and people jumping up and down gets our attention. That's the truth. And like we want to solve all those problems. If we had infinite resources, we really would. So it does serve a purpose when people complain out loud, and it's one of those things that we learned to manage, especially me personally. They would make personal attacks and things, say that, we're devious or whatever. But there was a kernel of truth in what they were saying. Like we weren't, as you said, CJ, maybe you used it when in 2020, we didn't have the dashboard open sourced yet. It's literally because I was too afraid to open source for security reasons. It had billing code and things like that. So the exercise to move it to Next.js and turn it into a a mono repo was actually quite an exercise to get it into the open source. And we spent a good couple of months, but largely because of a personal attack. And now I've become a lot better at, I think, as you said, Scott, like you kind of just need to be clear. Well, here's the contract that we have with you. Like we're not trying, like here's our commitment to you in the open source, this and not much more. Like we just need to make sure it's very clear, and we're not trying to pull the wool over anyone's eyes in terms of how open source we are.
Yeah. It seems like, you guys have definitely popularized the whole launch week thing. I think you were really even some of the first ones that I saw do that, if not the first. And it seems like you guys just launch a lot. I know that goes along with your incremental updates, but what does the future of Supabase look like? Like, what's the next step here? Because it's a really well-developed product. It does a lot of things. Like, what else can you even do here?
You're asking for me to reveal our next launch week, is that?
Oh, no. It does not have to be anything non-public. It can be anything, yeah.
No, actually, like, we haven't really got into the bottom of the laundry list on almost all of the products. So, like, Auth still has a few, like, really key features. Storage has a lot of key features. Like, each one of them, the way that launch weeks work actually is kind of more internal at this stage, where we need to organize the team. We're very asynchronous, so we don't have meetings or anything like that. So we just say, well, here's the date of the next launch week. Tell us what your like big project you're going to ship. And they come and tell us, oh, this is what we're going to ship. So yeah, I actually don't even know what is in launch week. I have some ideas of some things that are kind of new and exciting. But the next stages are really around scale and types of data that people want to store. People want to store a lot of their, people are storing logs inside their Postgres database, which is just not a good idea. They shouldn't be doing that, so we need to solve that. But we do want them to store their data with us and their logs and all that sort of data. So we've got enough problems. And as well, people aren't using branching well enough. They're not using the migrations well enough. We want better integrations with all the, ORMs, the drizzles and things like this. So there's a ton of stuff for us to still solve in the database space.
Yeah, speaking of branching and stuff like that, congrats on the GA. I know it was like 2 months ago at this point, but if you didn't know, Supabase was in beta for like 4 years until 2 months ago. Can you talk about maybe some of those features? Because I didn't even realize you all had branching now, so that's super cool. And maybe what are some of the other recent things that you launched that people should be excited about?
That's a good question. Now that we've got to, let me see what we did for GA.
I will say I'm also looking at a blog post on Supabase. It's called Top 10 Launches from Supabase GA Week. So that's definitely something to check out.
What is our top? I even wrote that and I can't remember all that. Yeah.
I love it.
There's a bit of something for everyone. Yeah.
Yeah, and I hadn't used that one yet either. I mean, there's so much new stuff that I need to explore in Supabase, but the first one is Bootstrap, so you literally have a CLI that'll create a new project. So that's pretty sweet.
Yeah, that one's actually cool. Like we're gonna do a bunch of these templates to like launch a project very fast. So you can Bootstrap with Next.js or Svelte or whatever it is. Yeah, as you said. Actually, yeah, these ones were like very cool. The security, performance, and index advisor. This one's cool because, I talked about you can use anything with Supabase. This is one of those tools that like really fits into that category in that like I saw someone was like, when we released our index advisor, it actually gives you this hypothetical index. If you add this index, it will reduce the latency on your query by 90% or something like that. And so I literally saw like one day after we released it, someone said, "Oh yeah, I turned this on and my query is 98.5% faster." So it was like an immediate win. Yeah. And that's cool because security as well on databases is incredibly hard. So we lean into row level security, which can be a bit niche. So, we want to build out a lot of this advisory stuff, which you don't think about when you're like, you don't want to have to learn. If you think about a development life cycle, you want to get started really fast. And then you want information exposed to you only at certain points. You don't want to have to be thinking about, is it secure? Is it fast? You just want to be thinking, does it work? Then after you get it working, you want to think, oh, is it safe? Is it secure? Is it fast? And that's where the advisor is kind of the right information at the right time. After you've done prototyping it, even on your local machine, you can then go to the advisor, have a scan through like all the recommendations and like enable this index or do that. And so it's kind of like a nice workflow pattern where you focus on building and then focus on the secondary steps.
Yeah. And that tracks too with what you were saying about maybe even some of those first customers being Jamstack or even primarily non-backend developers, right? Like those people are the prime candidate for somebody who's not going to write an index when they should. And they're going to see potentially slow queries because of it. So having any kind of advisor there is a great way to not only like help them, but to like educate them. I think that's kind of like a step most people have to go through when they're learning about performant database queries or any of that stuff.
One thing on the advisors, I think like credit really goes to PlanetScale on this one because I think they do a phenomenal job on database performance and really exposing like for a developer how to make their queries faster. So yeah, I think like we look up to them in that respect in terms of building a really good product for performance.
That's cool to hear. We host on PlanetScale and have used their branching, have used their indexing features like that. So yeah, it's cool to hear.
Yeah, it sounds to me like you could even take your Postgres database to Supabase and all of a sudden get a bunch of really good info, even if you're not using the rest of the product. Just all of a sudden you have a bunch of insight into your database, which is pretty cool. So one last like lighthearted question for you. The Supabase account on X is really good at posting memes and stuff like that. So you mentioned at the start of the interview that you like memes. Do you run that account, or is it like do you have like a Slack where people like workshop meme ideas?
Well, that's my co-founder, who funnily enough is our CTO, who spends a lot of time on our Twitter. We also have an internal memes channel, which is great for hiring around. We literally sometimes hire people because they like the reason why they get ahead is because they're good at memes on Twitter. So
nice.
Yeah, I think like our strategy there. No one wants to see a boring corporate Twitter account. We actually had never used Twitter before this, really. Like I think we had accounts, but had never really done developer marketing. But the one thing that we did think is like no one just wants to read about Supabase, this product that they've never heard of. They just want to hear about like shipping cool shit and doing memes. And so we were already sending memes to each other, and he just started posting them on Twitter. So yeah, it's worked very well for us.
If you can do it right, it works. I mean, sometimes like for certain companies, it'll come off as cringe, but Supabase is doing it right for sure. I always have a chuckle every morning.
That's the other funny thing. We actually realized this by trying to hire someone to do this for us instead of Ant doing it. And we realized that actually it's very hard to find someone who can do it right. And so now we're like, well, Ant, that's clearly the only thing you should be focused on. and other companies kind of just can't pull it off. I see sometimes like our competitors have clearly looked at our Twitter and they're like, oh, let's do what they're doing. They've got a lot of followers now. We need to do that. And I look at what they've done and it's just very cringe, just really off the mark. You kind of get memes or you don't, it seems. So
Yeah,
a lot of them don't, but
yeah, get a good chief meme officer on your team and you're good. Yeah. All right. So now's the part of the show where we talk about sick picks and shameless plugs. Paul, do you have a sick pick for us today?
Yeah. So I just arrived in the US 2 weeks ago, and I bought to try it out an Apple Vision Pro. So I've been testing it because I fly a lot, I travel a lot. So the idea is then I can work on a plane, work in a hotel room. So I've been trying it out. So far, I think I'm still in the honeymoon phase of this. I don't know whether it's going to be a regular feature in my life, but I'm very impressed with the technical aspects of the Vision Pro software.
Yeah,
a little bit not many things to download on it at this stage, but for a usefulness as a like monitor, second monitor or multiple monitors has been good so far.
Yeah, I have one too. I use mine a lot, like if I'm working outside, like I'm working at a table outside. I no longer am constrained to my little laptop, blow it up. There's an app that if you don't have yet split screen, it allows you to do multiple monitors. So you could have several monitors. And so that's a must have for me. I use that one a lot. But I agree, there's not a ton to use right now, but the experience is really pretty incredible, huh?
Yeah, it's crazy. Like I actually, in another startup life, worked on like kind of metaverse and AR, VR, and I like went deep on a lot of the things that could be solved. And I thought, well, the technology, the hardware just isn't going to be there until like 2026, 2028, 10 years ahead. And what they've delivered now is kind of just pulled forward 5 years. It's crazy.
Yeah.
It's crazy. Yeah, it feels like the software is what's lagging, which is the crazy bit. Yeah.
Yeah.
And shameless plugs, is there anything you would like to plug?
Yeah, I mean, of course, like if people want to use Supabase, I would love them to use it. But I guess the real plug, from my point of view, goes to Postgres. I think it's just such a good tool. It's really becoming better all the time. It's one of the most unique open source communities that I've ever seen, and I can see it becoming kind of just a staple to the world. So I think it would be hard to plug Supabase without just directly giving a lot of the credit to Postgres itself.
Nice. Awesome. Well, Paul, it's been amazing having you on. It's really great to learn about internals, tools, all that sort of stuff. And man, I can't wait to see where Supabase goes from here. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Peace.
Peace.